Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to talk about the 1973 science fiction film Soylent Green, part of this 4-pack DVD right here. Of course, this film starred Charlton Heston, and it was based on the novel Make Room, Make Room by Harry Harrison, a 1966 novel. This movie was directed by Richard Fleischer. It was made by MGM Studios at the time. So this is part of that wave of ecologically themed science fiction films that we get a lot of, especially in the early mid 1970s. This film is set in the year 2022 and in New York City, where the population has exploded to 40 million people, heavily overpopulated. Plus, you have climate change. The weather is much warmer in New York City. You have food shortages and you have food riots, civil unrest every day. You have class divisions where you have huge corporations in control of everything, and a small group of people who still have access to luxuries and things like that. Because the food most people have to eat are called Soylent food, Soylent Green, which they're told are plankton from the ocean, but as you know, it's not that. And so, like I said, there's no real food for most of the people. They got to eat these kind of disgusting things. So the movie does a good job of, I think, showing what the city would be like, very overpopulated, where there's just always crowds around and everyone is sweating. The look of the movie, the visual design of the movie is greenish and brown, and it just has a very kind of grim look to the movie as far as the visual style. Almost feels claustrophobic at times as well, but anyway, a little bit about the plot. So Charlton Heston stars as a detective, Thorn, Robert Thorn, and he is investigating a series of murders that lead to one of the corporations that is producing the food, the Soylent Green food. And I think if you're watching this movie, you kind of know where it's going. Everyone knows the twist, Soylent Green is people. That's entered the language, that line, but as far as the movie and the plot, it kind of has a noir feel to it as well, but it's kind of spoon-fed to the audience a bit. And I think the thing with this movie, where there are some really good scenes in this movie, I think it does a great way of presenting the overpopulated city and what that would look like. It also opens with a great montage where it's set to this interesting music, and we start out in Victorian times when the earth was green and everything was plentiful, and then we montaged into the 20th century with the internal combustion engines and the accumulation of junk and consumer goods and all these things. So that montage does a great job of kind of showing the decline of civilization and how the world got to that point in 2022 in this version of the story. But anyway, there's a series of murders, and it all leads to the food corporation, one of these food companies. The cast of the movie: Lee Taylor Young is in the film. She plays a young woman which this sounds very sexist these days. Young women are described as furniture in this film. Basically, they are property of very wealthy men. So that's in this movie. Chuck Connors is in here as a henchman for the corporations. Brock Peters as the chief, Hatcher, Heston's police chief. Edward G. Robinson, and in his final role as a fellow detective, retired detective, Solomon Roth, who lives with Heston. They're not have a father-son dynamic between them, but I think their scenes are probably the best things in the movie. And I talked about it's a movie of great moments where at one point Thorn is able to get some fresh food and fruit and meat and all these things, and he's never had real food before. And Edward G. Robinson remembers when he was a kid, when there was these places called supermarkets where you could go actually buy fresh food, and it was plentiful. So just that scene where they're eating and just enjoying this meal, and it does make you think, like, never ever take food for granted again, fresh food, after watching this scene where they've had to eat this awful food for most of their lives. And that scene always hits home as well. And like I said, Edward G. Robinson is really good, and you really feel like there's a genuine affection between the Heston character and the Robinson character. They're really good. So there's also the idea in this movie where euthanasia is part of this future, where the government has clinics where someone can go where they feel it's time for them to shuffle off, and they provide them with this peaceful way of dying, basically. And that's a haunting scene as well. But as Heston discovers the motives for these murders, and once he, eventually Edward G. Robinson goes to one of the euthanasia centers, and Heston's able to figure out what's going on, where he has to actually see it, visualize it, and see how it happens and everything. So, and learns, of course, that Soylent Green is people, as we learn in this at the end of the movie. Yeah, the movie's a bit schlocky. It does have a schlocky tone to it, but as I said, there are some really memorable scenes, and this movie has had a big influence on pop culture. Like shows like The Simpsons would reference this Soylent Green a lot, and even did a parody, I think, for one of their Treehouse of Horror specials. So it's a phrase you'll hear a lot. Soylent Green is people and things like that too. It's a harsh critique of course of how far corporations could go in the future to keep an overpopulated Earth at bay. Of course, the population of New York never reached 40 million people. But, there was, I talked about in the last video, where with ZPG, which was more about the government's trying to control children, the birth rates and things like that. And Soylent Green takes a more sociological approach of what this world would actually look like with all these very negative things happening in society and things like that. So it's it's a fun movie in a lot of ways, even though it's grim. As I said, there is like this little bit of a subtle humor running through the movie as well. Maybe that's through Heston's performance, but there is this kind of heightened reality to the movie that kind of takes the reality away in some ways. So it's interesting in that regard. And so I think that's all I had to say about Soylent Green. One of those ecological science fiction films that is still talked about today, and there's definitely some really 2 or 3 really memorable scenes in the film. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye.